Marianne and George had just marked 5 years of marriage, a milestone that carried more weight than either of them had expected. They'd weathered typical rough patches, moving in together, navigating awkward family introductions, and ironing out the quirks of each other's habits. Sure, there had been some tense moments along the way, but their bond had stayed strong through it all. The first year was a bit of an emotional roller coaster, full of highs and lows. But eventually, they settled into a rhythm, quiet, steady, and comfortably predictable. But sometimes, when life becomes too predictable, certain people see that as an open door. Dot dot. One evening, Marianne had plans to attend a bachelorette party for a close friend. Tie the knot. The night was supposed to be light-hearted, some spa treatments, a fancy dinner, and who knows what else. George had never been the possessive type. He trusted Marianne implicitly, knew how deeply she cherished their marriage, and never once suspected her of anything untoward. She meant the world to him, and he always tried to make sure her needs were met, emotionally, financially, in every way that mattered. Before heading out, Marianne took George's card with his blessing. He told her to use it if she wanted to indulge a bit. Later that evening, a bank notification popped up on George's phone. A hefty withdrawal had just been made. He paused for a second, curious about what she might have bought, but shrugged it off just as quickly. Money wasn't an issue. His job paid well, and if she wanted to splurge, he was more than fine with it. Marianne came home around 2 a.m., the faint scent of sparkling wine still clinging to her hair. She looked tired but cheerful. "We had the best time," she murmured, before crawling straight into bed. George, ever gentle, pulled a blanket over her, turned off the lights, and quietly lay beside her. A month slipped by, the memory of that night fading into the background. George's days carried on as usual. One afternoon, after wrapping up a lengthy meeting, he and some coworkers headed out for lunch at a local cafe. As they scanned the menus, the conversation took an unexpected turn. Someone brought up strip clubs and the types of people who frequented them. One guy launched into a story about a friend of his named Vincent, who'd been working as a male stripper for a couple of years. His tales were wild, bordering on unbelievable, and everyone at the table was all ears. Vincent wasn't the type to cross lines with clients, at least not without consequences. He kept things professional for the most part. Still, there was one story from about a month ago that stood out. Apparently, a woman at a bachelorette party had propositioned him, boldly, without hesitation. She wanted to see him again after the show and was willing to pay. The table erupted in laughter at the absurdity of it all, but George didn't crack a smile. Something about the timing, the night of the party, the money withdrawn, the description of the woman made his stomach twist. She was hot too, the coworker added with a chuckle. Vincent says she's married, or sort of married. Didn't seem to bother her much. He decided he had to talk to her, just lay everything out no matter how hard it might be. But when he got home, the house was empty. Marian hadn't returned yet. Lately, she'd been working late more often than usual. It used to be once in a while, but now it was starting to feel like a pattern. George didn't want to be the suspicious husband, but there it was. The thought had taken root. Finally, he heard the front door. Marian stormed in, flinging off her shoes and tossing her bag onto the armchair, like it had personally wronged her. "Michael Peterson made me redo those stupid reports again. I barely made it out alive," she groaned, heading for the fridge. When she turned and caught the look on George's face, she froze. He didn't raise his voice. Instead, he quietly said, "We need to talk." "Can we eat first? I could whip up some potatoes. Or maybe we order sushi?" she offered, still trying to keep things light. "No," he said softly, eyes downcast. "Let's talk first. It's important." She took a seat across from him, curious but unbothered, at least on the surface. "All right. What's going on?" George hesitated for a second, then decided to get straight to the point. No more dancing around it. "Marianne," he began, looking her in the eyes. "Are you cheating on me?" Her expression flickered, just for a heartbeat. A flash of surprise, a pause too brief to catch unless you were really looking. Then, just like that, it vanished. replaced by an innocent smile. Honey, why are you feeling so unsure? What can I do to ease your mind? We promised to stay loyal to each other, and you know I always stick to my word, Marian said, a touch of frustration flickering in her eyes as she looked at George. George just stared at his wife quietly for a moment, then muttered an apology for his careless question and suggested they go out for dinner instead. Marian's reaction felt a bit too innocent to him, but he had nothing solid to go on. What's the point in making a scene now? He thought. There's a smarter way to handle this. After dinner, George pulled out his laptop, a clear plan taking shape in his mind. He'd check out his colleagues' social media, sift through all the Vincents listed as friends, and find the right guy. Then, he'd send a message about booking a dancer for an upcoming event, the party he was organizing for the women's group. Of course, the whole story was a cover, but George really just wanted to see if Marianne had any connection with this dancer. Getting to the bottom of this was crucial. His doubts were eating him up. Scrolling through the list of friends with the same name was easy. There it was, the dancer he was after. The profile pic showed a young guy, seriously ripped. The next day, George was moody and silent. Marianne didn't press him, just wished him a quiet goodbye. As they left for work, once everyone had cleared out for lunch, and the office was empty enough for privacy, George dialed the stripper's number. Good afternoon, Vincent. My name's George. I'm in event planning, and I got your contact from some happy clients. I was wondering if we could meet to talk details. Pleasantly surprised by the unexpected opportunity, agreed to meet that evening at a coffee shop near George's office around 5 p.m. When Vincent showed up on time, he spotted a man waiting, looking serious. George? Vincent asked. I'm Vincent. Nice to meet you, George said, shaking Vincent's hand firmly. They settled across from each other, and George launched into the story. He explained that he worked at a small company and that their top employee was about to celebrate her birthday. To make it special, the team wanted to surprise her with a private dance during the party, which was set to happen at her place. George highlighted how tight-knit and supportive the group was, even though it was small. To make things clearer, George pulled out his phone and showed Vincent a photo of the birthday girl, watching closely for any sign of recognition. That's when Vincent's eyes grew wide, and a subtle smile tugged at his lips. That was all the confirmation George needed. Looks like you might recognize her, George said, trying to play down Vincent's surprise. Vincent paused, clearly unsure. She does look like someone I know, but I'm pretty sure it's not her. Anyway, let's focus on the job, he said. George took a slow sip of his coffee and outlined the plan. When you ring the doorbell, she'll be the one to answer. You say, "Beloved, here I am. At last I've found you." Don't ask about the meaning. That's a line from her favorite movie. She'll get it. Later, George packed his bag, pretended to call for a cab, and said goodbye to Marianne. He hurried away from the house, fully aware that Marianne would soon slip out and head next door to pick something up herself. Just as he'd guessed, about 10 minutes later, she stepped out of their apartment. George quickly retraced his steps, locked himself inside to avoid suspicion, and hid in the farthest room. Now all that was left was to wait, exactly until 7 o'clock sharp. The doorbell rang, catching Marianne completely off guard. Curious, she peeked through the peephole and let out a startled gasp before opening the door. Before she could say a word, Vincent's voice, smooth and slow, filled the room. "Darling, here I am. Finally found you," he murmured, almost purring. Marianne couldn't believe what she was seeing. "Vincent! Wow! I was just about to call you," she blurted, pulling him inside and throwing herself into his arms. The bizarre coincidence barely registered in Vincent's mind as Marianne quickly started slipping off his coat. "We've got the place all to ourselves. No time to waste," she laughed. Without hesitation, Vincent shrugged off his jacket, scooped Marianne up effortlessly, and they headed straight for the bedroom. Just then, George stepped forward, breaking through their whispered moments with a sharp cough. Marianne pushed Vincent away, her eyes wild with anger as she stared down her husband. George stayed quiet, watching the chaos unfold, bracing for the usual "it's not what you think" spiel. But Marianne caught him off guard. "This is exactly how it went down," she said, voice trembling. "You spend all your time at work, and our relationship's falling apart. Sam ignores me now, and I'm starving for love and attention. I'm still young, but you live like you're ancient. Look at what you've driven me to." She wrapped her arms around herself, drenched in self-pity. Without a word, George handed Vincent the cash for the private show, nodded in thanks, and gave him a firm pat on the shoulder. Confused, Vincent shuffled out. "That's it, darling. We're getting a divorce. I want half of everything," Marianne declared, fierce. "Go ahead, dig through the papers in my office, Marianne. Take a good look. It's all there. I make a solid living from my sales job," George replied, his voice surprisingly steady. "And you spent that money to buy yourself this young stallion, right?" George pointed to Vincent, who had recently left. "You're right. There will be a divorce, but don't flatter yourself about half the apartment. Maybe you should have taken a closer look at the prenuptial agreement." Marianne shifted uneasily on the bed, her mind going back to the issue of adultery. She was overwhelmed by a wave of anxiety, and her self-confidence began to melt right in front of their eyes. "Marianne, I need to talk," George began, trying to sound calm. "I think it's time we face the truth. This whole mess has turned into a joke. And it's obvious we don't understand each other anymore." His words stunned Marianne into silence. She scrambled for an excuse, grasping at straws, but George stood firm, fully aware of how serious he was about this. "There's no point," he said, voice cold and steady. "You know I don't take this lightly. Pack your things and leave. We'll settle everything in court." Tears welled up instantly as Marianne begged him, but George didn't budge. A week later, she started calling, claiming she was pregnant. Yet, George knew in his gut, if she wasn't lying, there was no way the child could be his. His job stress had kept him away for months. Eventually, they divorced. It turned out Marianne's pregnancy was from an affair she had after a bachelorette party. The news barely fazed George. He figured now she'd be chasing after the kid's real father, who just happened to be a dancer. As for their assets, they all stayed with him. Marianne had only two options left: move in with her mother or with her new lover. But George, he didn't care. The one thing that mattered was that he was finally free from an unfaithful wife. Like the saying goes, an unfaithful wife is a stranger under the same roof, and George couldn't agree more.